1987, Clive Barker changed the face of horror in a way that sent shockwaves through the industry and created a mythology that continues to fascinate and terrify. It also gave birth to a legend, an icon, and one of the new classics when it comes to the pantheon of horror films. I'm talking, of course, about Hellraiser and the Angel of Pain, Pinhead. The character became an obsession of many and made a lot of us take a long, hard look at how we felt about the lines and crossing them when it came to sexuality, spirituality, and horror. Beneath the pens and leather was actor Doug Bradley, whose iconic voice and talent would make the role his own. Bradley was born in Liverpool in 1954, and it was there where he befriended writer and director Clive Barker in secondary school, beginning a friendship and artistic collaboration that would continue to this day. Doug Bradley grew up in a time where he was baptized by the red gore of Hammer Studios and found himself a fan of actors like Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. Bradley would join Clive Barker in 1978 as part of the Dog Theatre Company, where he would play a lead role in numerous productions. The Forbidden and Salome was released on DVD as some of Barker's early film work and feature Bradley. Bradley's first major film role, though, would be, in fact, the lead Cenobite in Hellraiser. The film would be the beginning of a franchise which would rival other modern classics like Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween for the number of sequels, with Bradley playing the character of Pinhead a total of 8 times over the years, putting him on the same level as legends like Christopher Lee and Robert Englund for playing a role for consecutive times on screen. Doug's experience with the character and the makeup involved in bringing Pinhead to life led him to actually getting a makeup assistant credit on some of the films, as he grew so used to the process of applying and removing the prosthetics. This would no doubt help him years later when he wrote the book Behind the Mask of the Horror Actor, which is a history of movie monsters and the actors who brought them to the screen, as well as the many sorts of masks that were used in the roles. In his second appearance in Hellbound Hellraiser 2, we get to see Doug out of makeup, as we got to see who Pinhead was before he became Hell's High Priest. He was a military man by the name of Elliot Spencer. In the film, Christie reminds Pinhead, as well as the other Cenobites, of who they were before their transformation of the flesh. Elliot still has his powers, and helps Christie and Tiffany escape from the newly transformed Dr. Channard, giving Doug the chance to be a hero and show a different side of the character. After Hellbound, Clive brought to the screen a hybrid of fantasy and horror in Nightbreed, one of the most unique and fantastic films of the 90s, and one that has since become a cult classic and whose fan base continues to grow. Doug played the spiritual leader of the breed named Lylesburg, with another amazing makeup prosthetic, with Clive writing and directing the film based off his story Cabal. Nightbreed, unfortunately, upon release, was a victim of a studio not really knowing what to do with a film that had the monsters as heroes and was a love story about a dead man and a living woman. The marketing campaign did an injustice to the amazing creature effects and the real story, instead making the movie look like a slasher film with more of an emphasis on the horror side of things, going so far as to basically ripping off the Bad Dreams movie poster design instead of showcasing the creatures that were the heart and soul of the movie. To add insult to that injury, the studio dubbed Lylesburg's voice without actually telling Doug, so in the original release, it isn't Doug Bradley you hear, but another actor with a German accent. When the Cabal cut was released in 2014, Bradley and some other actors recorded dialogue to be added back to the restored version. I want to thank you guys for watching Where in the Horror Are They Now? And ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show. Doug would appear in Motorhead's Hellraiser video as Pinhead in 1992, the same year of the third Hellraiser film release. Ironically, he'd also play a clergyman in Inspector Morse the following year. Doug Bradley's career showed his ability to inhabit not only the most insane horror films, but also the far more sedate types of British roles, appearing in the Oscar Wilde-penned An Ideal Husband in 1999, directed by his Nightbreed co-star, Oliver Parker, who had portrayed Pelican. Doug would portray Pinhead one last time in 2005 for Hellraiser Hellworld, a direct-to-video release which took the Hellraiser mythos meta and involved online gamers who were playing an MMO set in the Hellraiser universe. The film would co-star Lance Henriksen as the evil host, and would also co-star Carrie Payton of The Walking Dead and Superman himself, Henry Cavill. Doug would follow this with an entry into the Pumpkinhead films, with Pumpkinhead Ashes to Ashes, where he's trying to stop the demon from killing people by, well, killing people. This would once again have Doug working alongside Lance Henriksen. Doug Bradley would actually become part of the Star Wars universe in 2014, as his iconic voice was used as part of the Star Wars The Old Republic online game as Of course, the Sith Emperor. He'd also joined some other genre favorites as the Envoy in the animated Howard Lovecraft series, along with Jeffrey Combs, Mark Hamill, and Christopher Plummer, starting in 2016 and appearing in all 3 films. Doug and his wife Steph created a hub for all of Doug's work with DougBradley.com. Doug started creating, along with some familiar faces like Robert Englund and Jeffrey Combs, the Spine Chillers audiobooks, which had the horror legends reading the works of the godfathers of horror, such as Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft. Since then, Doug has been contributing to his online channel, reading from classic works and doing live streams. In 2018, Doug became part of Blackcraft Wrestling as the character known as the Preacher, which... that's just freaking awesome. There's nothing not awesome about this. In 2020, just as the world was starting to go into shutdown mode, Doug was diagnosed with colon cancer. Doug kicked cancer's ass, as you would expect the master of hell would, and thankfully he's still cancer-free as of today. Doug Bradley continues to create and walk the darkened halls of horror. He's the voice of the narrator for the United States of Horror, which is currently filming its 2nd and 3rd chapters, an anthology that features, well, a horror story from each state in the US. He's also part of the star-studded cast of The Barn Part 2, the sequel to the indie horror flick The Barn, and co-starring Linnea Quigley, Joe Bob Briggs, aka John Bloom, and Diana Prince, aka Darcy the Mail Girl. Doug Bradley has become a legend in the hearts and minds of horror fans who have, quite poetically, given their flesh in his name. He's displayed in ink and art around the world, and he's quite comfortable in the realms of the terrifying, being a fan himself. He's a natural, actually, having never taken acting lessons, and as far as I can see, doesn't really need them. He's done pretty well, don't you think? Doug Bradley is part of that pantheon of horror, the new breed, if you will, walking in the bloody footsteps of actors like Christopher Lee, who, with just the sound of his voice, can send a cold shiver of fear along your flesh right before he tears it off.
We'll tear your soul apart.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today, sir. I totally appreciate it. I think you're going to really like what we do with this.
Well, let me be the judge of that.
I will. You're very good at judging. we know that. So
well, you have a busy room, to say the very least.
This is kind of a representation of what it's like in my brain, and you're over here on a couple of pairs of socks that I have on display.
I see that. Nice. Freshly washed, I hope.
Oh, never worn. I would not soil your image with my feet.
I wouldn't soil my feet with my image.
It was a true, as you will. Thank you so much again. I really, really appreciate it. I'm very excited about having another icon on. I'm just going to start because I have a ton of questions for you, and I know you have limited time. So my first question is, you've been acting for a while now, and I'm curious, what was the first spark that made you want to go and be an actor, and what attracted you to the theater specifically?
Wow, it was a long, slow process for me, and if I can go back to one place, it's a very unlikely origin, maybe. I don't know whether you're familiar with the British tradition of pantomime.
Yes.
Right. I in telling this, I often have to explain to American audiences exactly what this strange beast pantomime is. Basically, a Christmas entertainment, usually based on nursery rhymes or folk tales or Robin Hood or something like that, and it's a peculiar mixture. It's aimed at children. It's comedic. It will have musical acts in it. In the early 1960s, when I was first seeing it, even sometimes pop groups, dance routines, songs. There was always the tradition of the dame, who was the great blousy woman, usually the mother-in-law or something like that, was always played by a man. And indeed, I have essayed the pantomime dame, always known as dame in pantomime. myself on one occasion, wonderful lady by the name of Dame Sadie Spangle. That was in the mid-1980s. And I always have to struggle to make sure I've got this the right way around, but the principal girl was an actress playing a boy who was falling in love with a girl. I'm not even convinced I've got that the right way around, but something like that. So it's this curious mixture of cross-dressing and children's entertainment, and inevitably the dame's material would get a little blue, because parents would deal with their children, and there was a lot of rib nudging towards the parents in a lot of the dame's material. This is a long way round to saying that I always used to get taken to the pantomime when I was a boy. We'd go as a family to the Empire Theatre in Liverpool, which was where I was born and raised in England. And this one year, I think it was Mother Goose. It starred two very, very well-known names in English, British light entertainment and comedy, who may not be known to American audiences so much, Bruce Forsyth and Norman Wisdom, who actually appeared he made quite a few films, but very English films.
The names sound very familiar, actually, especially Forsyth. I'm trying to think of how I know that.
Well, he came over here at one point to try, because he was a strange, very English kind of entertainer. He introduced programs. He introduced Strictly Come Dancing, which was the UK version of Dancing with the Stars. Mm-hmm. He was the introducer on that. But he was a singer. He was a tap dancer, a comedian, a game show host, all-round entertainer. And he did come over to America at one point to try and make his name as a singer and dancer, and worked with Sammy Davis Jr. for a while. Wow. Said he was hugely impressed by his abilities. But Bruce Forsyth and Norman Wisdom were playing cricket. Now there's another English thing that I'm not even going to try and take.
This is a very British story. I love it.
It is. So, which involved, I can't remember which way around it was. One of them standing at one side of the stage with a cricket bat, and the other at the other side of the stage with a bucket full of small bags of candy. And he was tossing the bags of candy across the stage. So let's say it's Norman Wisdom tossing bags of candy across the stage to Bruce Forsyth, who was batting them out into the audience with his cricket bat to the children. I'm probably 7, something like that. And I have a very clear memory of sitting in the audience thinking that this looked like the best fun in the world, and slightly disbelieving that people could actually be allowed, apparently, to make a living out of doing this. That's the first time that I consciously remember thinking, that would be fun to do. And acting was always something that I did. If it was available to be done, I did it. And that led to really the day that changed my life, which was the day that at Quarry Bank High School in Liverpool, I got cast in the school play. I think this is 1969 now. So I'm 14, I get 14, 15. I was cast in the school play, which I was thrilled about, and went along to my first rehearsal, where I met my other cast members, which included a fella by the name of Clive Barker. which is why I call it the day that changed my life, because everything really followed from that moment. Clive was already writing, directing, starring in, and hand drawing the posters for his own plays.
Wow.
At Quarry. And I had been to see one of them independently before I, even knew him properly. And I got involved in another production that we were doing at school. And then after school and university, we started doing theatre in Liverpool. Very independent, very homemade theatre. By degrees, we moved to London. By the end of the 1970s, having been a mime troupe briefly in the mid-1970s, we'd started talking again, had moved down to London and formed a theatre company called the Dog Company. And I think really the penny dropped for me. We were doing a production, it's my favorite of Clive's plays, The History of the Devil. These plays are all published now, and I think certainly The History of the Devil has been produced independently and performed here in the States now. And I was playing the devil, which was by far and away the most challenging thing I'd undertaken at that point. It's a huge part, barely off stage for the entire duration of the play. And I was just having the most exciting and the most rewarding time of my career. And we were up at the Edinburgh Festival in, I think we're now 1981. And we were doing extremely well, which isn't easy to do on the Fringe in Edinburgh because there's so much going on. It's hard to convince audiences that they should be coming to your production as opposed to somebody else's. And even though we certainly The History of the Devil is an interesting title, I'd go and see that if I knew nothing else about
Exactly.
it. We were not making life easy for ourselves. We were an unknown theatre company with unknown actors performing plays by an unknown writer. But we were doing extremely well. And I think somewhere during that run, because we were there for something like 3 weeks, I think. And that was the first time I'd really had that experience as well, because we always toured. It was always one night here, one night there, one gig here, one gig there, To be in one place at the same time, going, even though we were actually performing in a converted school hall, but as it were, going on stage every night at the same time to do this role again was, to me, was nirvana. It was, it was just, oh, this is, and at some point during that, I thought, by now, apart from anything else, I'm kind of 26, 27. It's time I was deciding what I was going to do when I grew up. I'm still having that conversation with myself, by the way. I haven't really made my mind up yet. But it was somewhere in there that I thought, it looks as though I'm going to be doing this. And it was kind of partly because I wasn't really any good at anything else. And nothing else gave me the fulfillment that this did. And I was arrogant enough to think that I could do this as well as most and better than some. So on I went, and I guess even at that slightly more advanced age, I could at that point have decided to go to drama school. And in some ways, I regret that I didn't. But that decade of work, of theatre work, experimental, independent theatre work, to me was my theatre school. I learned on the job. I'd made my mistakes in public. And again, if it's a touch of arrogance, I don't care, but I didn't want to go and have somebody else tell me how they thought I ought to be doing it. So I've never had an acting lesson in my life.
That's amazing. And
some would say it shows.
Well, I would say it shows that you've immediately found what you were supposed to do in your life and your calling. That's really what I take from it.
I think so. I don't have any doubts about it. Let me put it that way.
I think you've done pretty well.
Thank you.
So one thing I wanted to ask you about, you in the story, you talked about working with Clive and starting the dog company. I was curious how you met and how you kind of grew up together. And also, I'm kind of part of that, where your love of the horror genre started. Was that influenced by knowing Clive, or was that something that you kind of had already?
No, it was already there. As a boy, it was ghosts for me. I was obsessed by them. I've no idea why, other than that I know I was terrified of the concept of death. But I was terrified of seeing them, and I wanted to see them. They scared the life out of me, but I couldn't get enough of them. Reading ghost stories or watching stuff on TV that, you know, was guaranteed to scare me, but I was going to do it anyway. One of the first movies I can remember really, really scaring me was The Innocents, directed by Jack Clayton, based on Henry James's The Turn of the Screw. I was delighted that when I watched it again as an adult, I realized part of the reason this movie made such an impression on me is that it's a brilliant film. It remains to this day one of my top 5 favorite films in or out of the genre. I think it's a magnificent piece of filmmaking. Such an ambiguous ending that I think you wouldn't be allowed to have these days, and that kind of psychosexual element in Deborah Carr's character, that opening scene between her and Michael Redgrave. I wouldn't have registered this as a kid, but you watch that scene now and it's very deliberate and it's very unsettling, and it's there, I think, to throw every moral compass adrift. You know, as Michael Redgrave's character is basically saying, I want to hire you to be the governess to my children because I can't have them here with me in London because they get in the way, because I want to screw my way around London. I can't do that with the kids around. That's effectively what he's saying.
Yep.
And built into that conversation is this kind of flirtatious relationship between him and Deborah Carr during the interview. It was particularly when the ghost of the housekeeper, Miss lost her name, doesn't matter, when when Deborah Carr sees her sitting at the desk in the schoolroom and she's crying, and then she disappears, but she leaves a real tear on the slate, and all the scenes with her down by the river. And I remember at the end of the movie going upstairs to the bathroom to pee and having that halfway up, halfway down moment where I was very aware of the defensible space behind me that I couldn't control, and what might be behind me that I couldn't see or might be coming up the stairs behind me.
Yep.
So the urge is to run up the stairs to get away from it, but I'm scared about what might be around the corner on the landing that I can't see. So I'm scared of running up the stairs, and I'm kind of stranded halfway up, halfway down. And then making it to the bathroom and using the advantage that boys have, which is peeing sideways onto the bowl with my back to the wall. So I knew nothing. I knew there was nothing behind me.
Defensive peeing.
Exactly. So that was always there. And then I think it would be around the same time, I think, that I would have been doing that school play, but somewhere I can't remember the precise time frame now, but when I was a teenager anyway, Granada Television, which was the independent television station in the northwest of England, they started showing the whole of Hammer's back catalogue. I think they called it Appointment with Fear. It came on at after News at 10, which was the big flagship news program, finished at 10:30, and then on came the Hammer movie, and they went through the entire back catalogue, which was
Wow.
my introduction to my hero in the genre, which is Peter Cushing, and Cushing and Lee, and but so at the same time, I'm meeting Clive, and of course he was a huge horror fan, and I remember, gang of us would always go and see the new horror films as they came out, and then sit and analyze them for a long time.
I'm curious, was your interest in ghosts, because I've learned over a couple of last years, actually, they were doing some specials. Was it due to there's a tradition that I've heard that is in England, where in the UK, where you read ghost stories for Christmas? Was that something that you ever participated in, or was that something that you ever
I don't remember it being something I participated in, but it's certainly true. And I, why exactly that might be, I don't know. I know that I think partly the tradition stems from M.R. James, who was a great 19th century author of ghost stories, scary stories. Titles like A Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad is maybe one of his best known. It's been made into a movie a couple of times. But the BBC used to do. He had a group of students around him. He was he the dean at a college in Cambridge, something like that, either
Right.
Oxford or Cambridge, and he was like an eminent medieval scholar, considered one of the great authorities on English medieval history. And he kind of wrote his stories, which is what he's remembered for now, principally, in his spare time. And he would read his new stories to his students approaching midnight on Christmas Eve.
Right.
Why exactly that was the case, I don't know. And I think somehow that tradition has carried forward. I remember, again, I think as a teenager, the BBC used to regularly put a dramatization of an M.R. James story on at Christmas, sometimes on Christmas night.
I want to say I saw
Christmas Carol, of course, which takes us back to
Right.
Dickens and earlier, which is the great haunting Christmas story.
I want to say I saw a special, an episode of these M.R. James stories being told, and Christopher Lee was playing M.R. James. It was something he would be reading, and then they would dramatize the story. And right. I think I saw that. I may have dreamed it. That sounds like something I would make up in my head.
Sounds like a good dream.
Oh, it was fantastic. But kind of piggybacking off of that, you've recorded some amazing audiobooks of these classic horror stories. You've done with Spine Chillers. You've done a lot of Poe. You've had Robert Englund and Jeffrey Combs come on and do H.P. Lovecraft. I was curious what you would think. Even today, we still go back to these stories and re-dramatize them. We plunge in to find those nuggets of just the greatness of them. What do you think makes these still endure today? And what's your favorite from these writers and why?
Oh, that's a
big question.
Jessica. Yes, it is. I think you can take the tradition in which they were writing as far back as you want to. You can take this back into native folk legends and myths. You can take it certainly into Greek mythology and Hindu mythology and the great mythologies of the world. I think you can even take it into the Old Testament if you want to, and you will find these elements active always. And really, there isn't a major writer worth his salt or her salt who hasn't gone into this territory at some time. Shakespeare certainly did. Christopher Marlowe, Shakespeare's great contemporary, certainly did. And a lot of Shakespeare's contemporaries did as well. I think to some extent, in terms of the short story, it may partly be the fact that they got there first. Nobody's really writing short stories. Is it Hoffenbach, I think, in the early 19th century, ahead of Poe, who I see sometimes being mentioned as the guy who's got forgotten in all of this history. And I keep thinking, I have to go back and read him. I hope I'm remembering his name correctly. Hoffen something, anyway. And then comes Poe, who's you know, he wouldn't have been aware that he was doing it, but he absolutely set the table for every horror writer who came after him, I think. You know, all of whom openly acknowledge his influence, Lovecraft particularly. And Lovecraft again then casts his own shadow long across the 20th century, and every writer who's followed him. But the 19th century seems to have been a particularly fertile time for these stories and these writers, which is a blessing to me, because in terms of the Spine Chillers series, we could only look at stories that were in the public domain for financial reasons. So
Exactly.
it was a blessing to us that it was, you know, it was a well that we could keep going back to again and again. 19th century turning into the 20th century, because, you know, there's Lovecraft and people that I never really got round to, like Algernon Blackwood, and one of my own personal favorites, which is Arthur Machen. We only recorded one of his stories, the Bowman, but I've kind of moved the Spine Chillers thing forward now with my YouTube channel, where I'm continuing to do the same, and I'm trying not to repeat stories that I had already recorded for Spine Chillers, though that's difficult to avoid a bit sometimes.
And people want to hear it.
you asked me my favorite, and my favorite writer unashamedly is Poe. I just think he's brilliant, and spending time, because I think we had a Poe story on every single volume.
I think you did.
Spine Chillers, and that was 13 volumes, and poems as well. Spending a lot of time that close to Poe's language increased my respect for him even more than it already was. He shifts his language to suit the story, and even within stories. So a story like The Fall of the House of Usher, which is written in his kind of high poetic Gothic style, he shifts the tenor of his language partway through the story. And some of those, I mean, there are sentences in The Fall of the House of Usher that are like walking into a maze, you know, and you get halfway in, and there's a clause within a clause within a clause within a clause, and you're beginning to panic that you'll never find your way out of this sentence to the full stop, to the period. But then you come to my personal favorite of Poe's, which is the Telltale Heart. It's so brief, it's so short, and the language is abrupt. It's short sentences, and it's almost monosyllabic, and it's almost modern in its style of writing. It's not complicated language at all. And then you go from there to a story like Morella, or, you know, where again you're back in in the high Gothic poetic style. I mean, my admiration for him is never ending, really.
It's amazing. I absolutely, he's one of my favorites of all time, and I still need to make the pilgrimage to his grave. I really want to go visit his.
Whereabouts are you based?
I'm in Eugene, Oregon. So
Okay.
I'm as far away from Edgar as you can get, which
I've been twice.
It's fantastic here. The rainy season has started.
In Westminster. I'm sorry, I meant I've been to both Poe's graves in the Westminster Cemetery in Baltimore. It's worth a visit.
Oh, I want to go so bad.
Because of course he was originally buried round the back of the church, and then dug up and reburied where the memorial now stands.
The statue
near the gates. And I've also been twice to the house in Baltimore, where he was very briefly with Virginia and Maria. Mm-hmm. Quite when he was much younger. It's hard to talk about him as being younger, really, when he was only 40 when he died.
Right.
And I've also visited the house in Philadelphia that he lived in for a period of time.
I'd love to go on a tour of that. It's a dream. At some point, when all this is over, I'm going to go there, and I'm going to go. I will do this. So one thing I wanted to ask you about, and I know I'm probably going to lose you here pretty soon, but you've fully embraced the horror film world, which I absolutely admire. You've totally embraced it. What was the journey like for you for that? And, and for you as an actor within these horror roles, do you find the genre gives you a wider range that you can really let go and do things that more other genres might restrict you in?
Not really. I mean, to be honest, I've never placed any restrictions on myself. If there have been any restrictions, there have been restrictions that other people have placed on me. I didn't become an actor with any specific ambition to work in horror movies. And when the dog company ended in 1982, my working relationship with Clive at that point had ended. So I was off doing provincial repertory theatre up and down England, very, very, nothing at all like the material that I'd been doing for the previous 10 years, working in partnership with Clive. So it was a very different experience for me. And I had no clue that late in 1985, in the middle of a conversation about other things, Clive would quite casually say to me, "Oh, by the way, I'm trying to put together a low-budget independent British horror movie, and I think there's a part in there for you." To which I said, "Oh, cool, exciting." Anyway, what were we saying? And conversation moved on. So Hellraiser brought horror to me as an actor. I wasn't actively seeking it. Maybe I would have done subsequently, but because the love of horror had never left me. So it's never been an issue for me. It's never been a problem for me. Let's put it that way, because I love the genre and I love being part of it. So I've never fought shy of it in any sense. I've never worried about the idea of being pigeonholed. Boris Karloff, who's lurking over my shoulder here.
I see Robert Mitchum too.
Yes, in Night of the Demon, one of my favorite movies. Cushing's in there somewhere. I'm not sure where. Is he there? I think that's him. That's actually, that is Cushing. I have
I have Christopher Lee back here in about a couple. William Marshall is Blackula, and then
Yes,
over
I love
here,
those. Wonderful.
Peter Cushing as a good guy and a bad guy. I have him as Frankenstein, and I have him as Van Helsing on these two busts that
Right,
Hammer produced.
right.
And
I have. Be back in a moment.
I love comparing collections. Oh, yay. I know what these are. That's the one I've got.
Peter and Christopher right here.
That's the bust. I actually got the last one they had at the booth at San Diego Comic-Con. The last one that they had of him.
Yeah, I got these at a convention. They were just sitting there and still in their boxes.
Yeah.
And I walked past the booth and I went, fucking kidding me.
I know.
And they were not expensive. You can't get these things for love of money now. Really.
Yeah, you can't find them. The one I really wished I'd gotten, and JoBlo is going to be like, why are they talking about this crap? but I wish I'd gotten the Ingrid Pitt. They had her as Countess actually it was either Countess Dracula or Camilla, but she just was, it was glorious. And you'll never find that now because they stopped making those.
No, and I wish I had the Cushing as Van Helsing, but the attention to detail in this is amazing, just fantastic, and it's so solidly made.
Yeah.
You could drop this from a height and it's going to survive. They're wonderfully made. They're
gorgeous. I wish they'd go back and do that, but
where were we? What were we talking about?
We were talking about collectibles.
There was a reason I was pointing to Boris Karloff because he said in answer to the question about being typecast, and I don't think he really was, because you can't, and I've said this in relation to myself as Pinhead, how do I get typecast as Pinhead?
Right.
That's absurd, because it's a particular
there's no other character like that.
It doesn't, what I do to be Pinhead, what I look like to be Pinhead, has nothing to do with any other character you can conceive of. So it's not there. And the same, I think, is true for Boris in relation to the monster, my dear old monster, as he called him, and said, I owe him everything. And he said, if I'm typecast as an actor, I'm extremely lucky.
Because you're working and
he said, because it's like being a carpenter who's known for making a particular style of table.
Oh, that's beautiful.
If you want that particular style of table, you go to that carpenter.
That's a fantastic way of looking at it. So one thing I definitely wanted to get in and ask you about, if you can't tell from the garb, is Nightbreed is quite possibly.
I'm going to mention your excellent taste.
Yes, and I love the hat.
Oh, get out. That's cool.
Fright rags. I give them all my money. So I absolutely love Nightbreed, and I wanted to ask you about your character of Lylesburg and how you created that role and what it was like filming that movie, because there's never been another like it. It's basically the Avengers of monsters is how I look at it. And I drove an hour and a half when it came out to go see it. I still have my movie ticket, the original ticket. It was an experience for me, and I loved the metaphor. And I wanted to ask you about that film specifically.
Sure. So it came right on the heels of the first two Hellraiser movies. I mean, it was quite it's a 2.5 year period from starting to film Hellraiser, which was my first movie, in the fall of 1986. And we're at Pinewood in the spring of 1989 making Hellbound, so making Nightbreed. So Hellraiser and Hellbound have happened, and now we're on to Nightbreed, which was planned to be the first of a trilogy, because Clive was planning that Cabal would be the first of a trilogy of novels, and there would be an answering Nightbreed movie to each Cabal novel. students of Clive's career will know that he often plans these massive epics, and they they tend not to happen, partly because his own mind is always, I've done that one, I want to go on to something else, rather than, you know, the kind of maybe mono-minded focus that would have been required to produce that trilogy of novels and make that trilogy of films. I think is in some ways, you know, not fundamentally his nature. His genius brain is always on to the next one.
He's always creating.
On to the next one. I love Cabal. Nightbreed is a complicated story in some ways. For me personally, you know, there was just that excitement that I'm doing another movie. This is crazy. You know, 3 years ago, I wasn't doing this. Now I'm here. It was slightly complicated because we had shot Hellbound at Pinewood. Now we were shooting Nightbreed at Pinewood, and a lot of the crew were the same as had worked on Hellbound, and the special effects makeup crew, image animation, were the same people. Although I had a different makeup artist. Jeff Portas had worked on my makeup on Hellraiser and Hellbound. I was fortunate enough to have Mark Coulier, now double Oscar-winning Mark Coulier, doing Lylesberg's makeup, which I think is a magnificent makeup. The problem for me was that every part of that journey and the makeup process, to me, was inextricably bound up with Pinhead. It was all part of my journey into the character and the working day and the performance. So on Nightbreed, I tended to, you know, alarm at 3 o'clock, get 3 a.m., picked up at 3:30 at the studio at 4 a.m. to get into the makeup chair to begin the appliance. And on Nightbreed, it's exactly the same thing. I'm setting my alarm for 3. I'm being picked up at 3:30 by the same driver in the same car, and driving around the North Circular Road and out to Pinewood Studios to sit in the makeup chair with familiar faces around me. And although the Pinhead and Lylesberg makeups look very different, obviously, the makeup process is almost identical. And the smells of the glue and the paint and the latex and everything, to me, was all saying Pinhead. It was emotionally inextricably bound with the process of playing Pinhead. So it was playing, you know, there was a degree of mind games I had to play with myself to wrench myself away from Pinhead and focus on Lylesberg. But, you know, that's the job of acting. Don't confuse your characters.
You did a fantastic job, but you don't think about that.
I love that kind of, I mean, in my own head, Moses was the kind of shorthand I had. He was the lawgiver. He was the one who would come down from the mountainside with the tablets and given the breed, you know, that this is how we do this. The problem, of course, subsequently with Nightbreed was it's not really a horror film. I remember seeing, you know, that Stephen King quote on the Hellraiser poster, "I've seen the future of horror, and his name is Clive Barker." And I thought, wow, that is fantastic. That's wonderful that he's got that from King. And I thought, you be careful, because as fast as you try and push him into a pigeonhole marked horror, he'll be planning how he can escape out the back of it.
Yep.
And Nightbreed is really a pure fantasy movie more than it's a horror film. It's fundamentally a romance. It's a, you know, it's a love story between in which the guy just happens to be dead, but which is, I always thought, strangely precisely echoes the fundamental the heart of the story in Hellraiser, another relationship between a woman and a dead guy. Welcome to the psychiatrist's chair, Mr. Barker.
No, there's nothing going on there.
Nothing to see here. But that's what it was at its core. And to me, the movie that I had in my mind, thinking about it, reading the script, preparing for it, talking to Clive, and when the first day I walked onto that huge set with the rope walkways, it was a big set. It was thrilling to be on that set. Fellini was what I kept thinking about, Satyricon particularly. But Clive was hot from horror, hot from Hellraiser. I mean, and Fox wanted a horror film, come hell or high water, and they were determined to get one. And you know, Clive fought them long and hard in LA, but they screwed with the film so much in post-production. The movie we shot at Pinewood was an absolutely faithful, almost page by page faithful adaptation of Cabal. And of course, the fundamental idea in Nightbreed is that the monsters are the good guys.
Yeah.
The monsters want to be left alone, to live in Midian under the cemetery. You know, you've got the renegade elements in, I guess, Kinski and Peliquin, who have different ideas, but basically the breed were a peaceful lot, and the humans are the monsters.
Yep.
It's a familiar story. But you know, the breed were the freaks and weirdos who just wanted to be left alone in peace and quiet to be freakish and weird. And I think they weren't really having that. So a lot of breed stuff got reshot to kind of make them appear more aggressive and malevolent, malign, which they were never intended to be. Right. As weird as they might look, they were not particularly malign, I don't think. And you know, in the end, they even managed to kind of turn it into a slasher movie, and they bring David Cronenberg's character to the center of the story. And it's not a criticism of David at all, who did a great job, I thought. But Decker's character, Decker in the novel and the screenplay, he's really like an extraordinary kickstart to the plot. But because they had this handle of welcome to the psychiatrist's chair, the serial killing psychoanalyst.
It all comes full circle.
They wanted to move him to the center of the story so they could market it as a slasher, and they screwed around with the editing so much. And then I got a phone call from somebody in LA telling me that Lylesburg was going to be revoiced.
Yeah.
And
I was really confused by that when I saw the film.
I think what they were saying to me, they didn't say it in so many words. I think what they were saying was nothing more complicated than, we have to ADR some of your lines, if not all of my lines, but they'd have to ADR some of them, maybe, as you do normally, because of noise on set or indistinct lines or whatever it may be. I think what they were saying was, we need to ADR your lines. I was still living in London then, obviously. We're not about to pay the money to fly you first class from London to LA, put you up in a hotel, pay you per diem, and pay you a going rate to come into the studio. Well, I wouldn't have needed to do that. That would have been built into the contract, but they would have needed to fork out all that money when they can get somebody to drive half an hour down the road to come into the studio for a couple of $100.
And speaking to a
Do it.
microphone. Yeah.
How or why Lyles Berge acquired a German accent, I've never found out the answer to that. And it's always at the back of my head to ask Clive about that. But to be honest, when I see him, we have better things to talk about. But I think some executive fell out of bed and bumped his head in the morning and thought, Lyles Berge, he's German. It was a shock to me because I didn't know it was coming. So when I went to the film to see the movie, and Lyles Berge opens his mouth and he's, it came as a bit of a shock. Let me put it that way. When you've lost your face, your voice becomes tremendously important to you in terms of your performance, and to lose your voice as well. I kind of felt like I wasn't really watching me, I think you're absolutely right. I think it remains a movie like no other, and thank God we've had the Cabal cut, which has I think gone a long way
right there
towards setting the record straight. There was a director's cut, that I do know. Dickie, who edited Hellraiser and Hellbound, I know that he edited Nightbreed and produced a director's cut. I always wondered whether that director's cut got butchered in the re-editing, or whether still to this day, somewhere in the basement or on a dusty shelf somewhere in LA sits a shelf marked Nightbreed director's cut.
Probably. Like the
but,
arc.
But the Cabal cut has put a lot of the record straight. There was a lot of stuff around the breed in the movie that just simply didn't make sense because of the way that they'd hacked the scenes around. And now it's just simply a case sometimes of getting a bit of dialogue at the beginning of a scene put back in place. Oh, that's what they're talking about. And I got my voice back.
You did. And I will tell you, it was one of the proudest moments of my life that I helped get that shown for the first time ever. I helped Mark get that shown at a con, the Cabal cut before it.
Yes. Where was that?
That was at Horror Hound Weekend. And I believe it was in the Indianapolis show. And that was when we had Clive come out. Right. And I cried a little bit at that because I'm like, this is the movie that we've been wanting to see. And absolutely, I was so happy to hear your voice coming out of him too, because when I saw that way back in 1989, 1990, I was like, I looked at him like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like Doug Bradley.
No,
I was confused. I'm like, he's not German. That's not his voice. His voice is
there was never any point in discussions with Clive that a German accent ever came up, or as far as I'm aware, it ever crossed our minds.
Somebody made that choice, but I don't know why or who. Yeah. It was very strange, but I'm glad.
And well done you for playing your part in bringing that.
By hook, by crook. I was when I found out Mark Miller had found that, and we covered it.
Apparently, the whole time lying on a shelf somewhere in Clive's office.
It doesn't surprise
somewhere.
I've seen Clive's office, and it doesn't surprise me that would have gotten lost in there.
There's a lot of shelves and a lot of books and a lot of stuff.
Binders. Lots of binders.
And to stress to people watching this, it wasn't that director's cut that I'm talking about, but it was a work print from Pinewood, which is kind of kind of a loose editing progress, I think would be the best way to describe it. It certainly needed a lot of work on it to.
It needed some love, but it did. I'm glad they did it. So I've kept you a very long time.
That's all right. Don't worry.
I did want to ask you though, because I know that you had your own fight with cancer over the last couple of years and you beat it, which thank whoever's listening. And I wanted to ask you because I'm a cancer survivor as well. And there's been, it's not a fun time, but there have been a lot of people talking about how fandom and, things to keep you motivated and going. And I was curious, was there anything that you kind of latched onto that helped you get through that in terms of, like for me, it was Doctor Who and horror films. Doctor Who and horror films got me through 3 months of hell. So I'm just curious if there was anything that kind of helped you get through that you.
Well, the first thing I have to say is that I got very lucky. I really did get very lucky. It was bowel cancer in my case. I had a few things down that end of my body that didn't seem quite right in the second half of what year are we in now? 21.
2021. They all kind of run together now.
19. So enough that towards the end of the year, I went to my doctor who said, when was your last colonoscopy? And I said, I've never had one.
Oh.
And when his eyebrows had come down from the ceiling, because I'm 65 at that point, just turning 65, he said, it'd be a good idea if we put that right. So I got sent for what I thought was a routine colonoscopy. I thought maybe I had IBS or colitis or something like that. When the gastroenterologist came back in, as I was coming out of the anesthetic, and he put the hand on my shoulder, which should have alerted me that something was coming. But at the time, I was kind of groggy and, hey, we've done a colonoscopy. That was great. Can I go home now? Where's Steph? Come on, let's go. And then slowly realized that he was telling, even when he was, saying we found something, I'm thinking, oh, cool. What'd you find? A lost tribe? A what? A chest of treasure? A dinosaur or two? What did you find down there? And then realized what he was actually telling me. But so I bang the drum for this now, since we're talking about this. I should have had colonoscopies at least 10 years earlier and on a regular basis thereafter. So I was that idiot who didn't. I am that idiot who only goes to the doctor when I have reason to think that something's broken. And I remember saying to the gastroenterologist at the end of it, I said, how long has this been there? And he very casually said, oh, years.
Yeah.
And apparently this thing was big, my own little monster lurking in the dark. It was apparently, and I had given it every opportunity, because I had not been getting tested. So it had been sitting there growing for quite some time. I had the clouds lifted a little for me, even by the end of the week that I got that news, because I went back in for blood work, and the results of that blood work came back and said, there's nothing in this blood work to indicate that there's any cancer anywhere else in your body. And that was obviously the first worry, was that this would have moved out of the colon, metastasized elsewhere. Then I had a CT scan, and I was actually standing in line at the post office. and the phone rang, and it was them. So I'm in the middle of the post office saying, hello, hello. And they said, oh, yes, we have the results of the CT scan. Okay. All clear. And that was, you know, what said, there's no evidence that it's got into the lymph glands, which is the main concern with bowel cancer. No sign that it had metastasized anywhere outside the colon. And when they got the thing out of me, so a couple of months later, I'm in for what they're describing as routine surgery. I mean, it's like I talked to so many people at that time who said, oh yeah, my dad had it. He's 20 years ago. He's fine. You know,
doesn't change it when you're there getting it.
They literally, you know, take out thing, and they cut here, glue there, put it back in again. It seems to be as simple as that. And while, as I say, I had given that thing every chance to get nasty with me, everything was precancerous or stage 1.
That's amazing.
And nothing had gone into the lymph system. So I got very lucky, and I'm extremely aware that not everybody is. You know, Chadwick Boseman, and he's a perfect example, because this is no respecter of age. We tend to think of it as something that should happen when you've reached my advancing years. He was what, 29, 30?
Yeah.
And gone in a heartbeat, you know. It's awful and it's horrible, but I was that lucky, so I didn't have to go through any chemo or anything like that. It was just, you know, booked in for surgery done, recovery from surgery. You know, that was just waiting for everything to stop hurting. And I had CT scans at 6 months, and I've had them again a year on, and I've just had them again at 18 months, and regular visits, video visits now, of course, with my surgeon. And everything's fine. And they'll do the tests again in March next year, which will be 2 years on. And assuming everything's fine out of that, they'll leave me alone for the next 3 years, they promise.
Yep.
So I really did get lucky. I mean, it sounds like you had a harder time of
it was recovery for me, because I was 30 years old and had to have a full hysterectomy. And yeah. I got really lucky though, because it hadn't metastasized anywhere, but it was rare enough that I'm chuffed that my tumor was so special. They took it to a conference. I named it Bob. Bob the tumor went on a tour. But
I hope he got paid well.
You'd think. No, I ended up paying out money, but no. But it was great, because I had my friends like you and David Tennant and Peter Cushing, who I have a mask of up there, but I had all of this to help keep me going, and it really helped get through. You know, it's like you're laid up for 3 months and you can't do anything.
I found myself oddly listening to a band that I don't listen to very much. I like their work, but I don't go to them for casual listening very much. Band called Godspeed You Black Emperor.
Ooh.
Very dark, long pieces, but I found myself listening to quite a lot of them. And because I was going in for my surgery in end of February into late March. Colonoscopy was the end of February last year. And then late March, I took with me a big fat book on the 1918-1921 flu epidemic.
You were planning ahead.
Well, it was coming. It was weird because we'd been to a convention in Charlotte in February. Didn't really think about it. didn't wear masks. Nobody was doing that.
At
Shook
that time,
hands with
no.
everybody, all of that. Came home and I was fine. I cancelled a show in Las Vegas only because, surgery was being scheduled. And then it got cancelled. And that was the first time I kind of thought, wow, what is going on here? But obviously at the time, I wasn't worried about.
You had more important things on your mind.
My focus was elsewhere, certainly. But I went into hospital on Monday. Steph came with me. She stayed in the hospital all day. She was allowed to be in my room with me, and they were allowing one visitor per patient. She went home in the evening. She came back the following day, and she'd been with me for about an hour, and a senior member of the nursing staff came into the room and said, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, but you can't be here."
They just started doing that.
We were, oh, what, why? What? They had changed their policy at midnight.
Wow.
To say no visitors. And at the beginning of that week, not everybody in the hospital was wearing masks. By the end of the week, everybody was, and everybody, when they came in to talk to me, apart from nurses who had to be close to me to do whatever they needed to do, were standing away. Everybody was putting gloves on and removing them and binning them when they went out. And when I came out, I was in on Monday, came out, I think, on Saturday. I suddenly emerged onto, what appeared to have wandered onto the set of 28 Days Later, or the early episodes of The Walking Dead or something. It was a completely different world to the one I had left behind when I went into hospital at the week. So it was like that week was the tipping point between people not being very overly concerned about this thing, and suddenly, boom, it was, so what happens now? So we can't go anywhere? No.
Really?
What do you mean? I can't. So we had planned, I planned a victory lap, my fuck cancer tour. We planned, we were going to do a convention in Arizona, and we were going to stay on in Sedona I'd found a really nice resort hotel, money no object. Fuck that, it's only money.
After you've been through that, you don't give it two
to stay there and lounge by the pool for a week. Nope.
Wow. I will. I'm going to wrap this up, but I have to give you my funny colonoscopy story.
Okay.
Because I think you'll appreciate this, because the kind of cancer I had leaves you more apt to get colon cancer, and I also have it run in my family. So, which is good genes. Yay. I love it. So I had my colonoscopy.
Thanks, Mom and Dad.
Yeah, everybody, thanks for giving me the best. So I went in for the colonoscopy, and for the first time ever, I woke up during the colonoscopy.
Oh no.
And I woke up, it was like a Cronenberg film. Yes. I woke up and I hear the doctor saying, "But I want to take it out. And I want to cut it out." And I'm just like,
what are they talking about?
What the fuck? And I'm like, and I literally grabbed the nurse and I pulled her down, and I just growled out, "I'm awake."
You're not taking anything out without my
and so they went, "Oh, okay, shot." And I'm like, funk. So they had to double dose me, and I came out of it, and I'm like, what the hell happened? And it turned out they'd found a polyp.
Yes.
And that's what he cut out, but I couldn't have timed it better. Waking up to the words, "I want to cut it out though." Like, no.
Yeah, well, they've found polyps in me subsequently, and almost certainly the tumor began life as a little baby polyp. And
Yep.
if I'd been doing the sensible thing and being regularly tested, you know, they would have said, yeah, we found a polyp, we took it out, nothing to worry about, move on, you know, and
Yeah.
it would, we'd never have got that. That's an extraordinary thing though. Fuck. I just read a thing. I think it's another Trump book coming out, which said that he was taken in for a routine colonoscopy and he insisted on doing it under local anesthetic. Because if they'd put him under general anesthetic, he would have had to transfer power to Mike Pence.
Yep, that
just
sounds like something that he would do.
What are you out for an hour, two at the most?
Yeah,
but the idea for him that he would have to transfer power for the period of time that he was under anesthetic was a sign of weakness, and
so
he wouldn't do it.
Wow. Well, Doug, this has been fantastic.
And end on.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, to end. I wanted to ask you though, really quickly, where can we find you and see you upcoming?
Well, I'd started to get back on the convention trail around May time, when things were looking rather more optimistic. I just cancelled the rest of my conventions for this year, which actually have moved to next year. Now. Yeah, one was cancelled, which was Son of Monster Mania in Burbank, and then I was booked for Monster Mania in Baltimore and Spooky Empire in Orlando, which was just last weekend. So I just was looking at the numbers and I just thought, you know what, I don't think this seems like a good idea. And I had done a convention here in Pittsburgh in August, and I walked in on the Saturday morning. The place was packed, you know, which normally is great. Good. We're all going to be busy and we're all going to do well. This is great, and everybody's here and is going to have a good time, and that's fantastic. But I'm looking around this room and 95% of people are not wearing a mask. And I think Robert Englund and I were the only guests not wearing masks. And my first instinct was to say, you know what, I'm going home.
Yeah, it
doesn't seem like a great idea, you know. I mean, so I hope that conventions will be happening. You know, the numbers will get under control again. There are slightly optimistic signs again recently. So let's hope. But what I see around me is people keep trying to pretend that the thing has gone away, and it hasn't.
Yeah.
And it hasn't, you know. So, you know, I don't want to dive into political issues, but, you know, do the right thing. You know what the right thing is to do at this point. Do it, and you know, it'll help everybody. So I hope that will be happening. I did make a brief contribution, I guess a cameo is the word for it, to a movie that was shooting locally. So it was very easy to do. It was a half an hour's drive away from here, which was a sequel to a movie called The Barn.
So, hey, I remember that.
The Barn 2. I think Linnea Quigley and Ari Lehman, I think it is. I think they're both in it too. It was just I had a kind of long monologue story to tell, so it was kind of fun to do.
Nice.
So I guess that'll turn up at some point. The YouTube channel will be continuing. The most recent thing I recorded, which I haven't published yet, was an E.F. Benson story, who I'm starting to explore. He's another writer that got kind of neglected in the Spine Chillers series. and I like a lot of his stuff. The Upper Room, which is a very creepy story of his. That'll be on the YouTube channel, and then my next plan with that is to start a serialization of Jekyll and Hyde.
Oh, nice.
The Stevenson novel. Stevenson's a long time favorite author of mine. Treasure Island is one of my favorite books, bar none. So that will be coming up there. And at the moment, every Thursday, you can catch Down to Hell live on Twitch. That's the new thing that's been happening.
The streaming.
The streaming Twitch show, which has been exciting. We do shows. Stefco presents with me when we do open forum evenings, where it's just me and her and David, the producer. That's through Horror Hub, which I've been partnering a lot with Horror Hub, and that's growing a lot, and I'm excited being part of that. So that's every Thursday, 8 o'clock Eastern time, and every other week we have on guests. So far we've had Josh Balls, who's also part of Horror Hub, and so kind of indirectly one of the producers of the show. People know him from the band Motionless in White. We had Mick Garris on. People will know his name from a lot of horror stuff. And he was just great. He's just a lovely guy. Scout Taylor Compton was on. Matt Montgomery was a guest who people may know better as Piggy D, from bass player from Rob Zombie's band.
Nice.
And he's just written a lovely collection of scary poems for children.
Fantastic.
Taking us back to Nightbreed, All My Friends Are Freaks. And then our most recent guest was Robert Englund.
Oh, Robert. Oh boy, he can talk.
Not a problem as far as interviews go. Yeah, we only we had limited time with him. I think we'll get him back on at some point, because we do go on. It's not just an interview, really, because it's me, and I'm not, the kick is out of, people just seem to think it was a great idea to listen to two old farts, yammering on for an hour. But it's a conversation that I'm looking for, really, rather than a straightforward interview, because I think that would just be kind of odd in a way. I don't know when you're putting this out, but
it'll be up next month.
Next month, okay.
November, yeah.
Oh, well, then there's not much point in telling you that tomorrow, as we're sitting talking, which is a few days before Halloween, our guest right before Halloween is Steve Gonzalez from Ghost Nation, nice. Ghost Hunters.
Nice.
And he's just also produced and directed a long form documentary, which is worth a look, I think, called The House in Between.
Oh, nice.
So
that's all. You are a busy man.
So I hope by the time this has time traveled into the future, and Steve tomorrow is in the past, I hope the show will still be happening. So we go out live on Thursdays, and then all the shows are available if you subscribe on demand. So if you can go back and look at the Robert Englund show if you so wish. It doesn't cost very much, and in fact, if you're I think it's like $5 to subscription to get to watch those. And in fact, I believe if you're an Amazon Prime member, you get one free subscription. So
Awesome. Well, Doug, again, thank you so much. This has been absolutely fantastic. And I will send you the link to this once it goes live, and I hope you love it. And again, you're a legend. Thank you so much. And I'm so glad you're healthy and well. And again, you're amazing.
Well, I say the same thing to you, Jessica.
Thank you, sir.
And congratulations on beating that. That's great. And,
thank you so much.
And this has been a pleasure. And
same here. Thank you so much, sir. You have a great rest of your day. And again, happy Halloween.
Halloween. Even though it will have happened by the time.
It's true. It's all timey-wimey.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our JoBlo Videos channel. Tell your friends who like this sort of content and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all of our latest videos. We're an independent company and we appreciate all of your support.